Welcome to Shrub Pruning Bootcamp. I'm Eric Buehl. Most of you know me. I want to introduce Dr. Andrew Ristvey. He's a commercial horticulture specialist with University of Maryland Extension. Behind the lens today is Logan Bilbrough, communication coordinator with University of Maryland Sea Grant Extension program. Today, we're going to talk about pruning shrubs with Andrew, because I know when you go out in the field, and it's me as well, that pruning shrubs can be really overwhelming. But working with the pros here, it's not as bad as you think if you focus on the buds and the stems. And with guidance from Andrew today, I think we're going to get a lot out of this.
Cool. Thanks, Eric. And I think today we're going to focus on two different cuts, the heading cut and the thinning cut. Both of those have two different functions for the shrub. The heading cuts basically reduce length, but they promote growth behind the cut. And thinning cuts are exactly that. They actually thin out the shrub without adding or promoting growth. So, why don't we start?
Sure.
I think the first thing we want to do is maybe discuss our tools. I like to have a high quality pruner, and I like pass-through pruners. Basically, they scissor. Pruners that I like to stay away from are those that are guillotine cuts. Basically, you have a blade and then a flat surface in which the blade comes down on. That flat surface I've seen in the past tends to damage the stems and branches that we're cutting off. So try to get use or buy pass-through cutters or pruners. They behave just like scissors. Okay. The next thing it's important to do is to clean your tools. Isopropyl rubbing alcohol or some sort of alcohol, 70% or more is good. This prevents transmission of diseases from one plant to another when you're cutting these plants. So you want to clean your tools before you use them. All right, so our first cut is going to be a heading cut, and I think it's really important that we have some understanding of some terminology in plant anatomy. The first the first words I need you to understand are the stem and the branch. The stem is what we are cutting the branch away from. So the branch is what's being cut, and the stem is what's being cut away from. So if we were to do a heading cut, and a heading cut is basically cutting the stem away from a branch. And basically the heading cut reduces the size, the height, or the width of a plant or the shrub, and this actually may increase the overall girth of the plant, or not the girth, but may actually improve or promote more growth of lateral buds when you do a heading cut. For instance, this particular shrub right here, we're going to reduce the height of it. This is important that if we've got plants underneath buildings, underneath wires or something like that, that we need to reduce the height. And we're going to do this heading cut. And a heading cut comes in just above the branch that we want to keep. Heading cuts are typically at a 45-degree angle away from the branch that we're cutting. And they are only maybe about, I would say, in a small branch like this, we want to have them about a 1/4 inch above the branch that we're cutting away from. All right, so I'll go ahead and make this cut. All right, so notice I have a 45-degree angle on this branch the stem that I cut away from. We're about a 1/4 inch above the branch so that the branch doesn't desiccate. We've got a lot of vascular tissue. Water would be coming out of here, transpiring out. And also that 1/4 inch is just enough space for this branch. Once it starts growing higher, it'll actually compartmentalize this wound. So this next cut we're going to do is another type of a heading cut. And the point of this one is to remove branches that are bumping up against other branches. Basically, we are thinning out this shrub. We don't want branches bumping into each other, rubbing each other, and causing damage to other parts of the shrub. So I'm going to, again, with the same idea, take this heading cut and I'm going to just trim away this stem and remove it from the tree, or the shrub, so that we can thin it out. We also have some extra material here that we want to get rid of. This is going to be this is what I would call a thinning cut, because we're taking a branch away from a stem. When you do these particular cuts, thinning cuts, you want to try to find the branch collar, which is tissue of the stem that surrounds the initial part of the branch as it comes out of the stem. You want to make sure you do not cut that branch collar. We'll find some other branch collars that are a lot easier to identify. But at this stage, let's remove this crowding branch. All right.
So Andrew, this is an example of, we've got a well-defined landscape bed, but we've got a shrub that's now starting to encroach. It's going to drive the mowers crazy. They're just going to come in with a weed whacker and lop it off. How do you handle this?
Well, what I would do with this particular branch is cut it all the way back to the stem. So this would be a thinning cut. Sure. And again, what we want to make sure with these is that we're cutting close to the stem. We're cutting that branch off close to the stem, but we're not cutting it flush with the stem. In any situation like this, we're trying to identify that branch collar, which is stem tissue that will be the main tissue that compartmentalizes that wound. And you want to be careful not to damage any of that stem tissue, or it will delay the compartmentalization, or even cause more damage later on through disease getting into the plant if it doesn't compartmentalize quickly. So with right here, the branch collar is relatively close to the stem tissue, and so maybe about a 1/4 inch away or so from the stem, I will cut the branch, and then eventually the branch tissue, the stem tissue, will grow around this wound. So the next thing we want to talk about is removing dead material from a shrub. This is an inkberry, which has not been in a very happy place. It receives a lot of shade, and plants that receive a lot of shade, if they're typically used to having a lot of sunshine, are going to do one of two things. They're either going to grow really spindly, so they're going to try to reach as quick as possible up to the light that is available to them. Or what they'll do is they'll shed branches. Basically, they'll just cut off the life source to a branch and let it die off. Basically, it's their own form of pruning. It doesn't look good in the landscape, so you need to remove this material. There are ways to determine whether your material is dead or not, especially if you're working with deciduous plants. You can just simply take a fingernail and just very carefully scrape away a little bit of the bark material. If it's green underneath, then that branch is living. If it's dark, or if it's hard to scrape off, there's no green underneath, that means the branch material is dead. In taking off dead branch material, it's always good to find out where it's living and then cut back to that point, similar as you would if it's a living branch that you're taking away from a stem. You try to find that branch collar or any portion of that living tissue, try to save. That living tissue will eventually compartmentalize the wound, ideally. You'll find a lot of times that when you get into cutting dead wood, it's very difficult to cut with pruners, primarily because there's no moisture in the wood, and it's just generally difficult to get down through that material with just hand pruners. Sometimes you really need to have loppers. The point is you want to try to, again, get rid of as much of this dead material as possible, and get it out away from the living material. You want to kind of, or you could just break it off. That's how dead this one is. I'm thinking that this shrub itself really doesn't have a whole lot of life left to it. It probably needs to be removed and replaced, and ideally with something that is more shade tolerant. But again, the idea of cutting away dead material is to find where it is living and cut near that living material so that it will eventually compartmentalize around the wound. So as I was making my way back to this this shrub with dead tissue in it, I accidentally bumped this branch and broke it. These are branches that you probably want to try to remove because they're not going to grow very well. They might end up becoming dead tissue anyways, or leave exposed a portion of tissue for fungus and rot that would get inside of the living plant itself. So what I want to do is I want to make a heading cut off of this branch that I broke. I'll go back to its origin as it's branching out from other stem tissue. Again, I want to try to make this 45-degree angle cut and cut near, but not too close to the branch material that I am trying to save, or the stem material I'm trying to save. So the other thing Eric wanted me to talk about was dealing with suckers. Those are adventitious roots that shoot out away from the parent plant and then grow as a normal plant in another location in the landscape. These are great for filling areas out, but if you want a more controlled landscape, it's always a good idea to try to control these suckers. This is one in particular we're focused on. This is from Itea virginica, or Virginia sweet spire. This is a plant that typically suckers a lot, depending if it's, I think it suckers when it doesn't get a whole lot of light. It really wants to spread roots out to find other sources of light. And you can see this part right here is suckering from probably this parent plant right here. You've got some of it here also. Ideally, managing these is to try to remove the whole sucker from its point of origin. If you just were to cut it here, right at this stage, you've got a whole root or an adventitious stem that has already roots growing in it, and it's going to shoot more suckers up out. So you really want to try to find it at the point where it's emerging from the parent plant, and then take a spade and cut it back towards the parent plant, and then try to pull up that plant, the sucker plant itself. All right, so some additional thoughts on plant anatomy. We know that plants grow their branches in either alternate, which is alternating up the stem, where you'll have a bud and a branch, or opposite, where the bud and the branch are actually next to each other or across from each other, or whorled. Well, you'll have it's a more complicated opposite design where you'll have several branches coming off of a stem at a single point. With a plant that has an opposite growth pattern, instead of that 45-degree heading cut, you need to make a heading cut that's actually perpendicular to the stem. And again, probably a 1/4 inch out above the branches that you're cutting the stem away from. So it's perpendicular across to the direction of the stem, and just maybe a 1/4 inch away above the two branches that you're cutting the stem away from. Okay, so this Magnolia virginiana really has some very obvious branch collars. And again, as I said earlier, the branch collar is that portion of the stem tissue which actually does the growth and compartmentalizes the wound. And we want to make sure we don't damage that branch collar. That branch collar is stem tissue, and you can see right at the base of the branch you have kind of like a bump or some sort of round surface that surrounds the branch as it comes out of the stem. And that bump, or that's kind of a large portion of the branch, is that branch collar you want to stay away from. So if I were to make this cut, I would cut this stem or this branch right here, forward of the branch collar, which is right here. We're going to remove this branch, and we're going to remove it just above the branch collar from the stem. The branch collar is right here, and the branch we're going to be removing is this. and I just have to take my pruners and just up from the branch collar is to make that cut. The branch collar has not been damaged, and this will probably compartmentalize this summer.
Well, Andrew, thank you for sharing your wisdom and knowledge today about pruning different shrubs and the right way to go about doing things. And hopefully not everybody's going to be panicked when they go to do it. I know I'm going to go home and give some of these tips and tricks a try. But there's one thing that I think, one question that you haven't answered yet. When do you prune?
So pruning plants is really based on their flowering schedule, certainly if you're interested in seeing flowers in your plant. Those plants that flower in the spring, you should not prune anytime past mid-July, because mid-July the previous year, because that's when those flowers are developing in the primordial buds. So if you are planning on pruning plants that flower in the spring, you typically do it after they flower, when they start pushing their new growth. You can do it anytime up into July, but before the mid-July, because by that time they're already starting to develop their flowers. For those plants that that aren't spring bloomers, you can prune anytime between after they bloom through the fall, and then early spring up to probably around I would say before June. And you can prune those plants out or prune the material out. I think that would be adequate in that regard.
Okay, and a follow-up question. This is Fothergilla, a commonly used native shrub. Now this is mid-February. We've gone through and pruned. We're not going to harm the plant, but because we pruned one that will flower in mid-spring, it's not going to have flowers in that particular new growth that's coming up. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. I'll appreciate you joining us. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Logan.